have a license to genetically modify human embryos.
Try to commit suicide with it and fail fairly regularly.
Tell the truth,
It's not dangerous to humans. No, it's not.
So are you ready to drink one?
GMO, does it mean genetically modified organism or God move over? Could mean both.
We have something going down here that everyone needs to pay attention to. This affects our food as a whole across the country. We have the USDA coming out and announcing that they're going to end the regulation of Monsanto's GMO corn. Some GMO corn that has been engineered to specifically try to counter their own herbicides that they're producing. And they're going to be able to do this without a permit. Now, this action that the USDA announced says that it applies to MON 87419 corn strain, which resists dicamba and glufosinate. Strain of corn here that is GMO, they're now going to be able to plant wherever they want without a permit, and this is going to affect everyone around them. We've already seen the other farmers come out and protest against this. We've already seen the proof of the GMOs jumping from field to field and contaminating the other farmers. So the organic farmers, once they get contaminated with this stuff, it's game over. This can end up taking over your crops, everything.
Monsanto Company, the manufacturer of Roundup, spent years erroneously advising farmers to exclusively use ever greater quantities of Roundup to control the weeds in their fields. And for years, farmers listened. Meanwhile, these weeds were receiving evolutionary pressure to select for a trait of resistance to Roundup. The Roundup-resistant trait is now dominant in weeds growing in many areas of the country. The introduction of genetically engineered plants is regulated by the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service of the USDA, pursuant to its authority under the Plant Protection Act. Where was the USDA while a weed problem that imperils modern agriculture practices was developing? In courtrooms across the country, USDA has been rebuked for having unreasonably and arbitrarily dismissed the environmental consequences of deregulating genetically engineered crops. In some cases, federal judges have found that the USDA could produce no written record that it had ever considered the impact on farmers. Thus, a federal district court invalidated USDA's decision to deregulate Roundup Ready alfalfa. USDA is now awaiting further directions from a federal judge before taking further steps to consider whether and on what terms to deregulate this crop. Since taking office, Secretary Vilsack has promised that the new administration would take a fresh look at biotech crop policy. But the biotech industry isn't waiting for new policy. Chemical industry giants such as Dow, BASF, and Syngenta are plowing forward with new varieties of soy, corn, and cotton. They're already asking USDA to deregulate seed varieties that have been genetically engineered to tolerate their own herbicides. In fact, the evolution of Roundup-resistant weeds, while a problem for Monsanto, has been an opportunity for other large chemical companies. The immediate consequences of the deregulation and planting of these multiple herbicide-tolerant crops will be the increase in use of more toxic herbicides. Dicamba and 2,4-D are more toxic than Roundup, and their increased use can only be regarded as a setback for sustainable agriculture. In the longer term, the herbicide resistance of the weeds themselves could further change. If Roundup-resistant weeds evolved in only 10 years, could multiple herbicide-resistant weeds be far away? I'm going to ask that question again. If Roundup-resistant weeds evolved in only 10 years, could multiple herbicide-resistant weeds be far away?
Canada has just approved the world's first genetically modified food animal, an Atlantic salmon that's been engineered to grow twice as fast as normal. I sure didn't know that was going to happen, and I'll bet you didn't either. I'm Karen Riston, Executive Director at Living Oceans. For over 15 years, we've been working to protect wild salmon for healthy oceans and the communities that depend on them. The federal government's approval of GM salmon took us all by surprise. They wouldn't even tell us that they were considering this approval. It was all done in secret with no public debate whatsoever. From what we've been able to find out, the approval carries with it a risk that GM salmon might escape and become invasive, threatening wild stocks that are struggling to survive. That's why we've launched this lawsuit together with our colleagues at Ecology Action Centre in Halifax. I believe Canadians have a right to know about decisions like this in advance of them being made, so that we can express our views and have them taken into account.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, he's a Netherlands dwarf rabbit. With the sensor in his hand, it's a lot easier to manipulate the wing of the duck and be confident that I'm not hurting it. On screen, you can basically see what the sensors are picking up.
Imagine robot fingers that can actually feel. They can feel textures, temperatures, and vibrations. Sounds like science fiction, but it's real.
The BioTac is a biomimetic tactile sensor modeled after the human fingertip that's capable of sensing everything that your finger can detect. So
colors, I hear the frequency of light. So each color has its own note, and then I've memorized the name that everyone gives to each color. So I can actually distinguish all colors through sounds that go inside my head. The good thing about the antenna is that it also includes infrareds and ultraviolets, so I can perceive more colors than the visual ones. And also that I have internet connection, so I can receive colors from other parts of the world. Like if someone in the other side of the world wants to send a color to my head, they can do it through the mobile phone. Or I can also connect to satellites, so I can receive colors from space, basically. So I don't feel that I'm using or wearing technology. I feel that I am technology. I feel that the antenna is a part of my body. So I feel that cybernetics and my organism are united. So I feel cyborg. And most of my projects involve the union between cybernetics and humans, or the relationship between color and sound.
Dr. Miguel Nicolelis is at the forefront of developing BCI technology. By studying and monitoring the electrical signals of the human brain, his lab was able to create mind-controlled exoskeletons that translate the thoughts of paraplegic humans via an EEG cap into physical movement through the exoskeleton.
Brainstorms is a way to describe collective electrical signals produced by large numbers of brain cells. We were able to demonstrate that we could read these brainstorms from rat to monkey brains and decode some simple motor messages that were embedded in these brainstorms and use them to allow these animals to voluntarily control the movements of devices just by thinking.
The most cutting-edge brain-computer interfaces require direct implants into the brain. Dr. Nicolelis works with monkeys who have moved via these advanced implants everything from virtual avatars of themselves on computer screens to a robot across the world in Kyoto, Japan.
The group report says editing the genetic code of early-stage embryos is of tremendous value to research. It adds, although GM babies should not be allowed to be born at the moment, it may be morally acceptable under some circumstances in the future. This is a story from the BBC. They go on to say that the U.S. refuses to fund research involving the gene editing of embryos. The global group, Hingston, met in response to the phenomenal advances taking place in the field of genetics. A new range of novel techniques combine the molecular sat-nav that travels to a precise location in our DNA with a pair of molecular scissors that cut it. It has transformed research in a wide range of fields, but the progress means genetically modified babies are ceasing to be a prospect and fast becoming a possibility.
Ever licensed to genetically modify human embryos. This decision is making Britain one of the first countries in the world to grant the authorization to change the human DNA before babies are born. The UK scientists were given the go-ahead by the fertility regulator for a project that aims to give hope to women who are struggling to conceive. But of course it's raising a lot of ethical concerns. China did one thing last year. They started to take a look into altering human embryos to relieve a blood disorder. But this now with Great Britain really making headway in this situation. It's the first time it's gone through a proper regulatory decision, and really it's setting the trend and it's opening the door for all kinds of genetic manipulation of the human condition in the future.
GMO, does it mean genetically modified organism or God move over? Could mean both. GMOs are prevalent in over 80% of our packaged foods, according to estimates, and people are confused. They're also scared, which is a good thing. While many have no idea what GM foods are, we know that they can cause problems, and they are against creation. Taking the gene of one item, splicing it into another, is not God's plan for creation. That's why the God move over nickname that Jeffrey Smith, one of the leading GMO advocates, or should I say anti-GMO advocates, coined. Now,
right, specific, targeted set of research. So it's not as though it's now carte blanche where people can volunteer and have embryo, editing of embryos.
Right. At the moment, it's not something where someone can come out and say we'd like a child with green eyes or purple eyes, if that might one day be possible, and go out and do that. Right now, we're talking about the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority, HFEA. They've given authorization to start the experiments, which will be targeted at miscarriage and helping women to conceive more successfully. In the future, though, I'm sure it's not going to stay at just this type of a narrow experiment. It's likely that we'll see sort of future ways to maybe make sure that babies are healthy, for example. We have all sorts of genetic disorders that get passed down through generations, and this is opening the door to stopping those genes from being passed on. But of course, there are a lot of ethical concerns. There are a lot of religious groups that think that we shouldn't be messing around with the human species. And just in November, over 200 British scientists called for a ban on this. Just in November, they said it was because it would irrevocably alter the human species, and that we should really not cross any boundaries, because, who knows where this could lead us in the future.
life. No one should have that right to put patents on nature and life. As long as my wife and I have life within us, we will always go down to fight for the rights of farmers, always to be able to use their seed from year to year. No one should take that right away from anyone.
Judge ruled, number one, if you are contaminated against your wishes by Monsanto's GMOs, you no longer own your seeds or plants. They become the ownership of a corporation, in this case Monsanto. He also ruled we were not allowed to use our seeds or plants again. He also ruled that all our profit from our 1998 canola crop goes to Monsanto.